Excellent. That's a great start. And I'm going to turn to Claudia now because of the research and some of the impact that's going on with your scope and the focus specifically in water and some of the areas where you see maybe a need to develop more, or what you think are some of the areas that we're working successfully in.
Thanks. In fact, I'd like to use my 5 minutes to make a pitch for the CGIAR to do more work on energy and agriculture. And of course, it's CGIAR and partners. I have worked for many years, on water for food, and I think that's a pretty well-studied topic. We have an institute, the International Water Management Institute, that really just focuses on that. But we don't have an energy institute. So we have to work with partners, but we have to do a lot more. And I hope to convince you of why that's the case, why we have to work with institutes like in Colorado State, etc. So first, you all remember this wake-up call from the energy price shock that has translated into the food price shocks. And as a result, food security today cannot be seen without developments in the land, water, and energy sectors. So if the energy sector evolves in a specific way, food security of the poorest and most vulnerable could well be compromised. So it's really important to look at all these developments together. And why is energy now so important in agriculture? So about 2 decades ago, we traded about 10% of our food globally, and now it's almost 20%. So that uses a lot of fuel, but it's not only the food, it's also the input. So fertilizer is a very bulky input. It's moved all over the world. If the energy prices become more volatile, national production in many countries really depends on these imports. And therefore, the production will also become more volatile. So it's really important to better coordinate the energy and food sectors. We also have seen a very big increase in irrigated agriculture, produces about 40% of all the food in the world. The more interesting or more important change has been the groundwater reliance of much of the irrigation. So 40% of these 40% are produced from groundwater, about 10% from depleting groundwater. So we have a very big environmental challenge. We have very large energy use in irrigated agriculture. And we really haven't done much about it to improve it. So I think there's just some starts now. But that has increased the energy dependency of our food production dramatically. Similarly, and of course the most basic energy input in agriculture remains fertilizer. Agriculture without mechanization, without fertilizer, is almost non-thinkable, non-tenable today, including in developing countries, because we do want to intensify agriculture. We don't want to eliminate the remaining few tropical forests that we have, including for climate policy. It's really essential to preserve those remaining areas, so we don't want to expand our agriculture areas. So to do that, at this point, energy intensity has to increase and is increasing quite dramatically in many developing countries. But unfortunately, the development is not always going in the right direction. For example, in Pakistan, agricultural production increased by about 30% over the last 15 years. Energy intensity increased by more than 80%. So that's obviously not what we want to see. We want to see more food out of every unit of energy that goes into agricultural production. And the last point of why I think we're not doing that well on energy in agriculture is the fertilizer industry. I'm not an expert on it, but I believe it has been heavily protected everywhere in the world. The fertilizer industry is doing nothing different from what they've been doing 50 years ago. There has been no environmental pressure, no government pressure, no climate policy pressure on the fertilizer industry to clean up their act. I think only as a result of the increasing energy prices, they've finally started to at least talk about improving the efficiency of their production processes, but also also for the management on the ground, so deep placement of urea, et cetera, et cetera. So what can we do differently? So really we have to do something about it. What can we do differently? As Charles has already mentioned, we really need to break down the silos, food security strategies, always rely on water, always rely on land, and always rely on energy. So they should actually talk to the energy departments and to the water departments before they say, okay, we want to double irrigation in this piece of land, or in this province. The same, the energy sector, we've heard that only a third of Africans south of the Sahara currently have access to modern energy. So yes, all the countries in Africa want to increase, access to modern forms of energy, but they generally don't talk to the water sector. So they're putting hydropower in one place, which could be very bad for the environmental outcomes, could be bad for irrigated agriculture, We certainly have seen a lot of those pretty bad outcomes in Central Asia because they don't talk to each other, the sectors. So it's really very important that they talk to each other. Second, I mean, there's this elephant in the room, probably the only one that has been discussed in the agriculture sector, and that are fertilizer subsidies. Fertilizer subsidies generally only mostly support the rich, lead to unbalanced application, lead to very large water quality problems, very rapidly growing water quality problems that are entirely unaddressed in the developing countries. So phasing out those fertilizer subsidies is really a very important first step to improve energy access for all, safe water access, also improve agricultural productivity. But we should go further because the fossil fuel subsidies in 2010 were 408 billion US dollars. That's a staggering amount, 10 times the amount that goes into global public and private agriculture research. And that's just the fossil fuel part. So the renewable subsidies were only 66 billion. The 20% of the poorest people in the world only got 8% of the subsidies. The 1.3 billion, the Governor Ritter mentioned, that don't have any access to modern energy, of course, get zero. So this is a huge policy that increases inequity in the world, is very inefficiently used scarce public resources, and I think a lot could be done there. So other, obviously very important for the agriculture sector are to improve investments in technologies, including breeding efforts. For example, we published a study earlier this year that showed that nitrogen use efficiency breeding for crops could be a win-win-win across water, energy, and food sectors. It would obviously improve the water quality if the plants can use nitrogen better, basically by being bred into the plant. It would also increase energy use efficiency. It would help us to intensify agriculture without polluting the environment. So that is just one example of agricultural technologies where we just need much stronger development. There also more work needs to be done into conservation tillage, into integrated soil fertility management, low water pressure irrigation, low water use irrigation. All of those technologies lead to better outcomes across the water, energy, and food sectors. So I think much more work needs to be done there. And finally, I'm not going to touch on it, but I'll just mention it. We do need a lot more work on this rural decentralized energy system, microhydel. It could be through biofuels, but again, we have to be very careful about the trade-offs, where the crop residues go in developing countries, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, is very important for soil fertility. But I'll leave that point to my colleague, Sivam Sangi, who I believe will talk about that. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you.